All right, that leads me to you, Brendan. There was a moment when Donald Trump was talking about a conversation he had at a South Carolina boat company about sharks and boats with electric batteries. Here's a little part of what he said.
If the boat is sinking, water goes over the battery, the boat is sinking. Do I stay on top of the boat and get electrocuted? Or do I jump over by the shark and not get electrocuted? Because I will tell you, he didn't know the answer. He said, you know, nobody's ever asked me that question. I said, I think it's a good question.
Look, rally goers may not pay attention to these tangents. They may think that the comparisons to Jesus are apt. But at some point, do folks who say that they're worried about Biden's age start asking these questions about Trump? Do people who are truly undecided start looking at this stuff and wondering?
I think they start wondering whether or not he's a serious person. And I think that's something that the Biden team has been trying to do. Obviously, with the D-Day events last week, elevating the moment that we are in. This is a time for serious people. You need serious leaders. And if he continues to demonstrate himself to be unserious, I think there's a potential opportunity there. Now, is that particular riff or any like it gonna necessarily change people's perceptions? I don't know. I think people understand that Donald Trump has always sort of been weird like this. It underscores, though, that he is more of an entertainer than he is any type of political leader that we're used to. People are standing out there in the heat shows you that as much as this feels tired and people are sort of checked out of this election, there at this moment is energy with Republican voters, and they'll put up with just about anything because they think this is a person who's going to fix all of their problems. And Biden hasn't really been able to figure out a way to get the same energy with Democratic voters.
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point, while Trump avoided referencing his conviction in Las Vegas, Democrats didn't. The DNC installed a billboard near the rally location. It said, Trump was a disaster for Nevada's economy. Now he's back. They called him a convicted white-collar crook who is unfit to serve. But simultaneously, Nevada's governor has an op-ed in the New York Times saying that the reason Trump is winning voters in his state is because they can't afford gas and groceries. They can't afford to purchase a home or plan for retirement. Is the challenge for Team Biden, how effective is it to point the finger at Trump if voters are hurting now?
Yeah, I mean, when you do a billboard, that's not actually trying to win an argument. That's trying to get a little attention for an issue. They've dipped their toe into the criminal conviction here and there, but I think they realize that it's not going to be a big winner for them. That's not what people are voting on. And until the White House or the Biden campaign can figure out what an economic message is that not only advances what they're trying to do, but sinks in that what Donald Trump is potentially trying to do could be worse, they're not going to make any headway. This is an election that is going to be about the economy, inflation, and immigration. On every one of those issues, they're playing defense. And I don't know that dipping your toe into the criminal conviction is going to really change a whole lot. Look, it's not an easy thing to do, to talk about how well the economy is doing when a lot of people are feeling not well about it. But I think you have to drive to that core issue against your opponent about the things that people are actually worried about.
Let me switch gears just a little bit, but still on Donald Trump. You can tell the race to be his running mate is heating up by the sheer volume, right, of contenders who are making the rounds on TV. South Dakota's governor, Kristi Noem, her prospects, as you know, were largely considered gone after she acknowledged shooting her own puppy. But she says he should still pick a woman to be his running mate. This is what she said.
Having a woman that is helping him campaign makes a difference. Listen, I could be home in bed or feeding my horses right now or rocking my grandbabies, but I'm in Wisconsin because I believe President Trump needs to win. His policies are right for America, and they're perfect for South Dakota. And I want him to win, and the polling tells me that he needs women out on the campaign trail carrying his message.
Now, she or others may fit into what's long been conventional wisdom, right, Brendan, that a woman would help balance the ticket, that a person of color would help balance the ticket. But does conventional wisdom mean anything when it comes to Republican voters now for president?
No, and I don't know that conventional wisdom really ever held. I don't know that anybody really votes based on your VP. You should pick a VP for one reason only. Do you think this is a person who could be president if something were to happen?
You know, he actually did say that in an interview. I think it was with a local newspaper that I was reading this morning. That's what he said. He said that was going to be his criteria. Could somebody be president?
Yeah, and beyond that, somebody who you feel like is a good partner is going to advance your agenda. But this is obviously a very unique situation. Donald Trump is going to put whoever is his VP into very uncomfortable situations. And anybody who's lining up to do this job needs to know that. I think it is overlooked how loyal Mike Pence was to Donald Trump throughout all kinds of crazy stuff that happened. And even behind closed doors, Mike Pence never broke character. There was never a story about Mike Pence thinking Donald Trump was a bad person behind closed doors or anything to that nature. That is the bar that is being set. I think these people need to appreciate that this is going to be an even more unchecked administration. So he's going to be looking for somebody who is going to carry his water at every step of the way. And it's probably going to be tougher things to swallow than Mike Pence had to do.
Yeah, I mean, Kristi Noem was part of this blitz, right, of VP candidates who were on various Sunday shows, and all of them were asked about the vetting process. Take a listen.
Can you confirm whether or not you're being vetted formally?
Well, Shannon, as I've said, I think only one person knows who's on the short list.
I've actually not spoke about the vice presidential thing with the president directly.
I would just defer any questions back to the Trump campaign team.
So they're not saying anything except praising Donald Trump. Is that really the main criteria right now? Maybe both of those things, right? Don't give anything away. That's for me to talk about, meaning me, Donald Trump, and say nice things about me, meaning Donald Trump.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the funny thing is, like, any vice president should be able to back up the person at the top of the ticket. It's almost unremarkable, but you have to go to such lengths here to stick out. The funny thing, though, is I've talked to a number of Trump folks who actually believe that Donald Trump doesn't want anybody who looks too desperate for the job. That was one of the appeals, apparently, with Mike Pence, is that he said he could take a pass on it if it came to that. So you have to walk the line of being a staunch Trump defender and promoter without looking desperate. And I think that's why some of the folks have fallen off the short list.
There are some dark horse names that have been floated. Nikki Haley, Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Do you think that he might pick someone who's really not high up on the radar?
I would hate to get into Donald Trump's head. I can't imagine he's going to pick a Nikki Haley. I can't imagine he's going to pick anybody that tries to do anything that moderates his views. Look, I don't doubt that he might want to check a demographic box, but this is not a campaign built on persuading the middle or trying to win over independents. This is going to be all about turnout. Who does he think can excite people? Who does he think can travel around to battleground states, hold big rallies, amplify the message that day, and not be a distraction? And I don't know that any of those people, other than Nikki Haley, have the sort of wattage that he's going to be looking for. And I don't know that he's looking for anybody to moderate his positions.
Brendan Buck, always good to talk to you. Thanks, Brendan. Appreciate it.